Okay, it looks like we've got most of the folks into the webinar now. So welcome to today's webinar on supported education, supporting individuals to begin or return to higher education. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, housed at Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation. My name is Ann Murphy. I'm going to be the facilitator of the webinar today, and I am the director of the MHTTC here for the Northeast and Caribbean region. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental illnesses. We encourage you to visit the MHTTC Network website for additional information at mhttcnetwork.org. And you can find our specific center by looking at clicking on your center and then clicking on the Northeast and Caribbean. Before we begin the webinar today, I just wanted to let you know that you can subscribe to receive our email mailings by following this bit.ly link, and we'll send out information about future webinars and in-person trainings and technical assistance opportunities. We'll also post that link in the chat box momentarily. I also wanted to just highlight that the current webinar is part of a series of webinars that we're providing on recovery from serious mental illnesses and the practices that support recovery. We've already provided webinars on the key elements of recovery and recovery-oriented services, and a webinar on supported employment. Today's webinar on supported education is the third in this series. But we have several more coming up over the next few months, which you see there on the screen. And again, we will post links in the chat box to register for these upcoming webinars if you are interested in that. They're also listed on our website. I mentioned to you that our funding comes from SAMHSA, and the request that we have via our funding source is that you provide us feedback on this webinar and how it went. So after the conclusion of the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to a survey. It's a very brief survey, just a handful of questions, should take you 1 to 2 minutes, and it would mean a great deal to us if you would be willing to complete that afterwards. We take your input very seriously, and we would appreciate having it. Wanted to let you know that we'll be recording this webinar and posting it to our website, just so you're aware. Also wanted to do some housekeeping to let you know that we encourage you to interact with us and the presenters during this webinar. So there is a function within this webinar there's a button that says Q&A. And you can post any questions that you have as the webinar goes in that section. And we will address those at the end of the webinar with the presenters. You're also welcome to use the chat box to communicate with the presenters and with each other. I would just encourage you to make sure in the chat that you set who is receiving the chat. So I think the default is that only the presenters see your comment. So if you want your fellow webinar participants to see your comments, please make sure that you indicate all attendees. And we encourage you to do that, and the presenters may even pose some questions to you, and we encourage you to respond to those in the chat box as well. Today's presenters are Amy Banco and Brittany Stone. Amy Banco is a full-time lecturer in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions at Rutgers University. In addition to providing supported education and supported employment course instruction, Amy also serves as a lead trainer and consultant at the Integrated Employment Institute here at Rutgers. Within this role, Amy facilitates supported employment and supported education training and technical assistance to enhance practitioner competencies and program outcomes throughout New York and New Jersey. She's also provided training and consultation for employment and education providers in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Washington State. Prior to coming to Rutgers, Amy was a clinical contributor to 3 federally funded supported education and supported employment research projects. She's co-author of a best practices manual for providing career services to transition age youth. And she co-developed the first freestanding mobile outreach supported education program for individuals with mental health conditions in the state of New Jersey. She provided support to overseeing the first merger of supported education and supported employment programs in the state of New Jersey to create a fully comprehensive career services model. She currently serves as co-principal investigator and co-investigator on 2 qualitative studies exploring post-secondary academic success for students with mental health conditions and barriers to job tenure for individuals with mental health conditions. She also utilizes her knowledge and competencies from her lived experience of a mental health condition to inform her practices and instruction. We're very happy to have Amy with us today. We also have Brittany Stone, who's also a faculty member in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions at Rutgers. Much of her work as a researcher, trainer, and service provider has focused on promoting the career development of people with psychiatric conditions. She's worked in a variety of community-based mental health settings. She's a founding member of the New Jersey Supported Education Learning Enhancement and Resource Network, where she developed specialized knowledge in supporting college students with mental health conditions to complete their post-secondary education. She develops and provides training and technical assistance to agencies and staff seeking to improve education and employment outcomes for people with mental health conditions in New Jersey and surrounding states. She also provides online and classroom instruction and clinical supervision to students in the undergraduate psychosocial rehabilitation program and graduate students in the rehabilitation counseling program at Rutgers. She's been involved in federally funded research focused on supporting students with mental health conditions and has co-authored a career service manual for young adults. Currently, she serves as the co-chair of the Special Interest Group on Mental Health for the Association on Higher Education and Disability. We're very happy to have both Amy and Brittany with us here today, and I will turn it over to them to begin the presentation.
Thank you so much, Anne, for having us today. So Brittany and I are very excited to be here because we get to talk and discuss about our passion, which is supported education, helping people with mental health conditions to go back to school and achieve recovery. Today we are going to be using the SAMHSA evidence-based toolkit as a point of reference, the SAMHSA evidence-based supported education toolkit, which can be found on the SAMHSA website. It is a free resource and it is an in-depth training kit for supervisors and frontline staff. We have this resource linked in our pages. For our agenda for today, we are going to be going over the rationale for supported education, which I think is very crucial. It gives context and historical perspective to today's webinar. We're also going to define supported education so that you would have an understanding of what supported education is, as well as review the practices and principles of SED and discuss the practice of supported education in more detail. I think in terms of the main points from today, and Anne hit this topic earlier in her intro, is this concept about recovery. We emphasize in supported ed that recovery from serious mental illness, from mental health conditions, has been studied, documented by researchers, practitioners, and individuals with lived experience around the world and across time. Recovery is real. Recovery can be supported by practices and services that encourage participation and engagement in the community, in developing valued social roles, and overall wellness. This webinar is going to introduce you to one service modality, supporting people in developing meaningful life roles, the role of student, that fuels their recovery path. So first on our agenda, rationale for supported education. Why was supported education developed? And I think a great way to fully explore this is to make it personal, to come from a personal perspective of the value of education. So I would like for you to take a second to consider, the role that education has played in your own life. What ways has education improved your quality of life? In what ways has your educational experiences built your social network? How have your credentials added to your career trajectory? And I'm actually going to ask if you guys would be so kind to type out a few responses. Again, we're asking, how has education played a role in your life? What was that role?
So we see here that Renee has indicated that it's improved her quality of life. I know that for me, it made employment opportunities that would not have otherwise been available to me available. It also, I know that my ability to get my current job was facilitated by connections that I made through higher education. Others are saying similarly that allowed them to get the job they have now, to have employment that they enjoy, to open doors, to pursue the career they had dreamed of.
I love that.
To become a mental health counselor, which wouldn't have been possible without receiving a higher education degree, to pursue their career. So really it sounds like opening those doors.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you guys is that there is this shared experience. A lot of you are hitting the same similar points, that education has opened up your career pathway, your vocational options. And that is the same for individuals that we provide service to. So we're going to take a greater look at that. More and more, what we see is, and this is a statement from the Department of Education, there is an increased need for advanced educational degrees as a prerequisite for many skilled occupations. Additionally, post-secondary education is considered more and more necessary to compete in today's labor market. Persons with severe mental illness or mental health conditions must be able to compete by having access to education, right? So we're identifying there's value to be added to one's life through education. And this was, and I would argue still to this day, to some extent, a gap in our mental health service system. We all know about the evidence-based practice of supported employment. That is where support education was kind of derived from and originated from. It kind of mirrors this other evidence-based practice. And SE, supported employment, is renowned for its global benefits to individuals with severe mental illness. But the service model in regards to developing and achieving educational goals needed supplementing, right? So let's take a little bit of a further look at that. Hold on one second. We are having, thank you. So if we look at supported employment, let's take a step back. Let's take a look at unemployment. We know that unemployment has profound health effects for individuals, even without a mental health condition. When people are unemployed, and we saw a lot of research that came out of the 2008 Great Recession, we see when people are unemployed, even without a mental health condition, they have increases in anxiety, depression, substance usage, housing instability, suicidal ideation, medical comorbidities, right? So unemployment for people with mental health conditions is profound. It impacts them across all of their life roles, as well as their health in general. And unemployment for individuals with mental health conditions is epidemically high. It's at 80%. So here we have supported employment coming in, providing wraparound mobile services, and it results in amazing benefits when people go back to work. So what do we see? When we look at the benefits of employment, there's decrease in symptomology, right? That anxiety, that depression goes down. There's a decrease in recidivism, or the spinning door syndrome that we see with hospitalizations, right? The number of hospitalizations go down, the length of hospitalizations go down. So if someone is hospitalized, it's for less time. There's decrease in substance use, as well as a decrease in early mortality. Additionally, when we look at people going back to work, we see increases in things that are just as impactful and positive. We see when people go back to work with a mental health condition, there's increases in self-esteem, community integration, general functioning, housing stability, and quality of life. But when we look at some of the outcomes, some of the employment trends for supported employment, we start to see a pattern. Individuals who are working with supported employment programs, the majority of them are returning to work in part-time entry-level positions, earning minimum wages with short job tenure. And what we're kind of alluding to right here is, one, a potential lack of human capital, right? Human capital theory is an economic theory that really underscores the importance of braiding employment opportunities and experience along with education, knowledge, and life experiences to leverage that within the world of work and the labor market. And so if people don't have this braiding of employment opportunities and education, these are the types of jobs that they're going to be placed in or obtain. And this, especially this short job tenure, has been noted in many research studies. But what's interesting, when we look at that short job tenure in terms of supported employment outcomes, we can see that this short job tenure may not be indicative of people with mental health conditions returning to work. It might be indicative of the jobs that they're getting. And what I'm talking about here is this concept of a tiered labor market. When individuals with mental health conditions are going back to work in these entry-level positions, the labor market that they're in is this secondary labor market. And the characteristics of such is individuals have lower wages, minimal or no benefits, limited career mobility, education or credentials is not a requirement, less autonomy, right? There's very directive supervision. Additionally, that high rate of turnover or low tenure. Again, I think the best way to kind of conceptualize this is to think about your own circumstances. So I'm going to have you answer a question again. I want you to recall your first job, your very first job. Mine was at a bakery. I worked there one day because there were roaches in the back of the bakery where they were making the goods, right? I walked off that job. So what was your first position? Was it a waiter, cashier, camp counselor? I want you to recall the details of that job. How much did you get paid? What benefits did you receive? Did you get health insurance? 401k? Did you get paid time off? Consider this job. And now think about, could you pay for your current expenses with the money you were earning? Think about your housing payments, your car payments, childcare, food or grocery bills. Could you cover those costs today working at your first job? Let's hear from people. What are your thoughts? Where did you work first? And how could that sustain your current lifestyle?
So we have here, someone was a bagger at a grocery store, which was a union job, so it may have had some additional benefits. Newspaper delivery, cashier, no benefits, no leave. Oh, selling Cutco knives. I remember folks who did that. A waitress, so no benefits and very low hourly pay. Agricultural work. A bus girl, so again, working in food industry, administrative assistant, someone working at the zoo, and it wouldn't meet their needs. So a lot of low pay, $4 an hour, $6 an hour, et cetera. I guess I was also wondering, if I may, Amy, while you were talking, how long people stayed at these jobs. You were talking about the
Yeah.
short tenure.
Yeah.
So, I know in my early jobs, they were very short, like yours.
Very short. I always say to people when driving this point home, the person that you went to Dunkin' Donuts today to get your cup of coffee, they might not be there in another 3 months. It's the nature of the position, right? So when people are working permanently in jobs within this labor market, how does it impact their quality of life? How does it impact their ability to get off benefits and become financially self-sufficient? How does it impact community integration, right? That question bears repeating. How, when working in this labor market, can you integrate in the community when you don't have money or the means to engage in the community, to participate in activities in the community, to travel around the community, to live in the community? So if this is the secondary labor market, what is the other side of the coin? And that would be the primary labor market. I would wager that a lot of people in attendance today are in this primary labor market. And the characteristics of this particular labor market is as such: higher wages or salaries, additional benefits, so health insurance, paid time off, upward career mobility, the ability for promotions and opportunities, right? The emphasis might be on continued education, learning, growing within that position, growing within that field or that organization. There's increased employee autonomy, and there's more job security and stability. And so the acquisition of education is what opens up this primary labor market. And that's critical, right? That's key right here. You need education, higher education, whether it's a 2-year, 4-year degree, or even a vocational technical trade where you get certified. This opens up this labor market. And if you're a visual person, this really brings the point home. This is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is from 2018. 2019 will be available in February. And this nice little graph demonstrates on the left-hand side, education and attainment of education, right, rising. The lowest level is less than a high school diploma, and going up you see associate's degree, bachelor's degree, doctoral degree. And then immediately to the right of it, you see unemployment, that unemployment rate. And when the education goes up, unemployment goes down, right? They have an inverse relationship. And moving over one column over, we see median usual weekly earnings based on education level. And these two factors have a positive relationship. As the degree goes up, the earnings come up as well. So for example, if you are an individual with a bachelor's degree compared to someone with less than a high school diploma, the rate of unemployment is 2.2% versus the person with the high school diploma, 5.6% for the year 2018. Earnings for a bachelor's degree on average for a week is $1,198. Again, for that bachelor's degree, less than a high school diploma is $553 a week, right? That is significant. So the point that we're making here is that post-secondary education is crucial. It is critical. And we want to have that opportunity for people with mental health conditions to access post-secondary education. However, when we look at individuals within post-secondary education, we see those who have mental health conditions are less likely to enter college, and or after enrolling in college are more likely to drop out. In fact, mental health conditions are significantly related to higher dropout rates. We see approximately 7.2 million adults in the US have terminated education due to psychiatric symptoms. NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, puts the dropout rate at 76% for people with an SMI. And on the flip side of that, NAMI puts the re-entry rate at 32%. So people with SMI have been historically struggling to complete post-secondary education. And if people with mental health conditions are precluded from obtaining degrees in post-secondary ed, then they are assuredly relegated to the secondary labor market. So how do we help people complete higher ed and get into the primary labor market? What was the mental health field's response? What was SAMHSA's response? And that is the evidence-based practice of supported education. Supported education is a type of intervention that provides assistance and support that helps a person with a mental health condition through all the phases and stages of going to school, accessing it, right? Accessing higher ed, enrolling in higher ed, retaining or maintaining that matriculation, and successful completion, which is getting to cap and gown. Karen Unger, one of the leaders and original developers of support education, defines SED, or support education, as education in an integrated setting for people with mental health conditions for whom post-secondary ed has not traditionally occurred, or for people who post-secondary ed has been interrupted or intermittent as a result of their mental health condition. And when we look at support education, there's an emphasis on principles. And these principles include developing a new identity, right? Going from a person with a mental health condition to a student. New and normalized environment, helping people move from the environment and role of the mental health service setting to getting enrolled in school and accessing the community, integrating the community in a college setting. Developing structure, allowing for that person to develop a new routine in this new life role, giving them a clean slate, an opportunity to start fresh and develop a new narrative of who they are, what their strengths are, what their goals and purpose are, and hope, and that's critical, right? Hope that a person can grow, recover, and flourish in meaningful life roles. There are some historical perspectives in terms of support education and how it was provided. Support education was, and to this day, can still be found in some clubhouses. There have been some on-site seclusion supported education programs where individuals would go to a college campus and be enrolled in sometimes preparatory courses for entering post-secondary ed, and this would be done solely with other individuals with mental health conditions. And then there's the freestanding mobile outreach support education program, and this is what we're going to continue talking about today. This is what we see in SAMHSA's evidence-based toolkit, and this is what mirrors supported employment, that ability to be mobile and to support individuals at whatever college campus they attend. And Brittany is going to tell us more about what supported education looks like in practice.
So the supported education model described in the SAMHSA toolkit is based on a core set of practice principles. These principles form the foundation of the approach. If you're familiar with IPS, the evidence-based model of supported employment, you'll notice the similarities. Principle 1, access to an educational program with positive forward progress is the goal. People who want to return to school should have the opportunity to do so. Supported education provides the support necessary to fully and successfully participate in educational opportunities. This includes adult basic education, remedial education, high school equivalency, technical programs, college, graduate school, any level of education. The goal is really to facilitate long-term recovery goals. The second principle is that eligibility is based on personal choice. Students or prospective students are eligible for supported education services if they express a desire to return to school. Diagnosis, symptoms, cognitive impairment, history of substance use, or current substance use should not keep someone from pursuing that educational goal. No one should be excluded from receiving supported education services if they're interested in resuming their education, are willing to attend class, and willing to complete the assigned work. Principle 3, supported education services begin soon after one expresses interest. There isn't a long delay. Returning to school is a big step for many people. It may take courage, it takes a lot of insight to consider returning to an environment that might hold some difficult memories. Many of the students that we see entering into supported education have been there before, have had starts and stops along the way. And it's important to respond quickly in order to build on that initial expressed interest. A timely response coupled with support and encouragement, that sense of hope, can help a person return to that promising and productive role. The fourth principle is that education is integrated with treatment. Closely coordinating supported education services with other mental health rehab, other clinical treatment, ensures that all practitioners, not just education specialists, are supportive of a person's individualized educational goals. For this reason, the education specialist or supported ed counselor is part of that whole treatment team. It's not secluded or siloed. And therefore, everyone is able to monitor all goals and see how things overlap and come together for the person. Although the education specialist provides supported education services, all members of the team really help that person to meet those educational goals through an integrated delivery of service. The fifth principle, individualized educational services are offered for as long as they're needed. Some people who have psychiatric symptoms that persist over time, it might require a longer time commitment for school. And when you think about traditional bachelor's level degree programs, they're designed to be about 4 years full time. The majority of students with or without a mental health condition can take closer to 6 or 7, I believe is the latest average. So when you factor that in, or if you have somebody who's going part-time, who has other responsibilities, who might be working, you're looking at possibly an 8-year time commitment. So this is a really long-term approach. When Amy and I provided supported education services in the community, we often saw that, that people were starting school and moving through at all different paces and having all different progress. So it really does help to have those services that don't cut people off, that are there for as long as a person needs it. Optimal supported ed services should really be provided to people without those time limits. The next principle is that individualized preferences guide services. Individuals are most motivated and work hardest to strive for something that they want, right? And think about the experiences in your own life when you've considered making changes. Generally, we're most committed to the changes that hold meaning for us. When they're other people's goals, that's when we tend to lose motivation. For this reason, preferences guide all phases of our supported education services. People decide what they want to do and how they want the educational specialist to work with them. So services are going to look different for everyone coming into that supported education program. Principle 7, supported education is strengths-based. It promotes growth and hope. Supported education concentrates on building for the future rather than dwelling on the past. It's more concerned about who people are now and what they can accomplish. We want people to be looking forward, while also doing a realistic assessment so that either accommodations can be made, skills can be developed, and resources can be connected. And principle 8 is recovery is an ongoing process facilitated by meaningful roles. Although treatment might be critical for a lot of people to recover, it's not enough. The field of mental health has sometimes overlooked the importance of having those meaningful roles. We are all defined by the roles that we play, and the people that we work with are no exception. Whether it's being a worker, a student, a family member, a friend, all of these things can give context for a meaningful life. When people return to school, they assume a very valuable role in our society, and this implies forward movement. Returning to school can help with that internalized stigma. As Amy mentioned, it could be that clean slate. People can redefine themselves, and it can help with those feelings of hopelessness. It can signify a new beginning. So what do these actually look like in practice? Well, supported education follows a choose, get, keep model or framework, which helps people make choices about paths for education and training. It helps them get the right kind of education and training opportunities based on their goals. It also helps people keep their student status until they're able to achieve those goals. This choose, get, keep model is a psychiatric rehabilitation model conceptualized by Bill Anthony and colleagues at Boston University in the 1980s. It was originally designed for vocational rehabilitation, but later expanded to education and housing and employment programs. It's a systematic, stage-based process of assessing, planning, and providing interventions to help people with mental health conditions develop skills and support what's required to be successful and satisfied in their chosen roles. The focus on this model is on facilitating a specific practitioner individualized process to guide people to choose, get, and keep a rehabilitation goal that's meaningful to them. So let's dive into what this model looks like. The choosing phase of supported education is designed to help people make informed decisions about where, when, why, and how they want to return to school. As I'm talking about each of these phases, I want you to think about your own process of advancing or developing your education and your skill set. Think about what you did to evaluate and determine the environment or the course of study that was right for you. The getting phase is the next phase, and this is designed to secure admission or entrance into the educational environment of your choice. And lastly, the keeping phase is designed to promote student success through an ongoing assessment of the skills and resources necessary to maintain progress. So let's explore some of the common supports and services offered in each of these phases. I'm very heavy-handed on this clicker. Oops, sorry. All right, so within the choose phase of SED, great emphasis is placed on goal setting. As we know, education is extremely costly and time-consuming. So we want to be thorough in helping people explore this process and go through this decision-making process. That means really taking a look at people's interests, values, and preferences, as well as helping people determine their personal criteria for an educational program or environment. This is also time of relationship building, developing those partnerships, exploring fears and internalized stigma that might be getting in the way of somebody taking steps. We also want to make sure that we're looking at the factors that might impact somebody's ability to make those changes and take those steps. During this time, we work with the student to select their personal criteria for school. It allows them to evaluate the course of study, the type of program, and other characteristics of the educational environment, such as size, distance, cost, all of those things. So think about, what was your personal criteria when you were choosing an educational program? Were you thinking about where your friends were going to go? Were you thinking about, what can I afford? What's close to home? Do they have the major course of study? Is it a big campus or a small, intimate classroom? You know, what was appealing to you? By doing this, we're able to start operationalizing those educational goals by starting to put a plan in place. That leads to the get phase. So once somebody knows what it is that they want out of their education, they decide on an environment, they decide on a course of study, we move into get. What do they need to do to attain this goal? This is usually a shorter term phase of service with the person, and it's really targeted. It involves identifying and fulfilling the requirements for entrance. This might be doing those college applications, figuring out how much the application fee is and where are they going to get that money, sending in transcripts, gathering letters of recommendation, sending thank yous to the people who wrote them. But it also takes things into account like identifying transportation or childcare, addressing outstanding medical conditions, and even identifying funding sources. For many people, the funding component is a major stressor and something that might take a lot of time and energy to look into. It could be applying for federal or state aid, looking at scholarships, vocational rehabilitation as an option, and even private grants. but it also might require the student to address past loans that are in default and get those into good standing. Upon acceptance, registration is usually required, along with lots and lots of paperwork, a placement exam. It's also a time when we start to look at what is required of the university or the college or the educational program. So what are the policies that are in place that you might want to know about? What are the dates that you have to know? When do you need to register? When is that drop add period? We also do campus orientation during this phase. And this was one of my favorite parts in supported education, helping a student to explore the campus, taking them from building to building to see where they're going to need to go, where their classes are, helping them become familiar with things like the library or the health center, the Office of Accessibility Services. Then we move into the KEEP phase of service. This involves assessment of critical skills and resources in order to successfully fulfill the requirements of the semester. This may include skill development, like identifying time management strategies, coping skills to manage symptoms, stress management techniques, and anything else that might help the student to perform at an optimal capacity. It could also be linkages to other specialized resources. And these things could be community-based resources, campus-based resources, or treatment resources. Things like tutoring, counseling services, or social organizations can help connect to peers, as well as collaboration with treatment-based resources such as a therapist, a psychiatrist, or a residential counselor. Providing education around the ADA and services offered by the Office of Disability Services, sometimes called accessibility or student support services, is another critical piece. We see many students that are unaware of accommodations, or they only know about them in the most rudimentary fashion, right? Most of us have probably heard that students can get extended time on exams, but there are so many more ways that accommodations can help with functional issues related to a mental health condition. So providing a lot of education around that, helping the person to even identify what are the functional issues that they're experiencing in the classroom. Amy and I could do probably a whole day on that. In our New Jersey-based programs, we typically talk about a three-prong approach to supported education services, and this is really seen heavily in this KEEP phase, and that's identifying needed skills, linkage to resources, and accommodation education. Students need a range of supports and resources that continue for as long as they're needed. All three of these areas are things that need to be done on an ongoing basis, where they're constantly monitoring and refining student progress, but also talking about satisfaction of the student and celebrating success. So during each phase of service, we're continuously assessing the role of the student, including their interests and values, paired with the educational setting, requirements, and preferences. Then we're considering what are the skills and supports needed along the way. And these things, again, are always going to be changing. What does the student have? What is available to them within their environment? And what is needed in order for them to be successful and satisfied? Now, when we talk about success and satisfaction, we're talking about satisfaction as an internal view, how you feel about what you're doing. When we're talking about success, that's more external. What are your professors thinking about what you're doing? What do the people around you say? So we can sometimes have success without satisfaction, and sometimes we could have satisfaction without success. I like to say that I love music and I love to sing along to music, but my children will tell me that I'm not very successful at doing that. Likewise, if you've ever had a job that you're really good at, people always tell you, oh, you're great, you're wonderful at this, you get a lot of praise at work, but you don't feel satisfied at the end of the day. So we want to constantly check in with students too about success and satisfaction in their environment. Some things might change from semester to semester, and some others might be constant. We always want to consider skills along with resources and supports. Things like accommodations or assistive tech, compensatory strategies. Like I said, those things would be a whole other webinar. So when we're thinking about this choose, get, keep approach, we want it to be a periodic review. We want students to or practitioners to use this framework on a micro level each semester or quarter, depending on the educational environment. The choose phase can be modified to determine what is needed every semester. And this might involve meeting with academic advisors, talking about academic progress, selecting new accommodations or supports, and setting or reassessing academic goals. For a lot of people, this might be the first time that they're in an academic environment. And for many of us, we don't know what it is we want to do until we start doing it, right? Until we start testing the waters. So reassessment is a natural part of this process. When we're thinking about then what does that get phase look like in this periodic review, that might mean figuring out what is needed to get the classes that you want. So is it early registration? Is it fulfilling certain prereqs? Securing an internship? Completing necessary paperwork for support services? So we want to, again, every semester, every quarter, reevaluate what's needed. What are the new steps we have to take? And then finally, taking stock of what's required for the semester. How am I going to keep my classes this semester? Do I need a new time management strategy or organization strategy? Maybe now I'm working or have other responsibilities and I need to figure out how to navigate and juggle these different roles. Utilizing different resources or building new skills. For some students, it might be saying, you know, I have a lab that I didn't have last time, or I have a lecture class and I don't know if my same accommodations are going to work. So figuring out what is needed on an ongoing basis. While the SAMHSA toolkit uses a choose, get, keep approach, some of you might be familiar with a choose, get, keep, leave. So I do want to address that. And that's how Amy and I were both trained in career services. And it's typically how we instruct practitioners to approach supported ed services. So I'm going to add just a little bit about that here. In this leave phase of choose, get, keep, this is really just a mindful exit, a way to intentionally discontinue or end a goal. It may be that you're assisting a student and mid-semester, they have to make a choice about whether to withdraw, take a leave of absence, or an incomplete. We want these choices to be done, you know, in a really intentional way. The idea here is to minimize consequences, such as those that might come with failure to maintain satisfactory academic progress. The thing with the satisfactory academic progress that this can impact your financial aid. So for students who are receiving Pell Grants or federal aid, if they haven't been able to keep a certain GPA, or if they haven't attained a certain number of credits within a time period, they might be denied ongoing aid. So financial aid laws, they changed around 2013 and have become much more strict regarding satisfactory academic progress. So we want to help students to make sure that they're aware of those things, to navigate that, to think through how these decisions, such as withdrawal, leave of absence, incomplete, might impact their funding, their academic progress, you know, and just everything else that might go along with some of these consequences and decisions. It could also be that a student is considering transferring to another program. How many of you have changed your major or changed schools during the course of your educational studies? So it's the same with the people that we're working with. Sometimes it's not the right path, it's not the right environment. So we might want to help students consider that. Or if somebody's approaching graduation, what are they going to need to do to fulfill those requirements? I remember it was kind of a surprise to me that you had to apply for graduation. And it wasn't that you were applying for graduation like a week before graduation. You had to do that months before, and you had to pay a fee for that. So as graduation is approaching, are there certain requirements? Have they met with their academic advisor? Do they know what they're going to do post-graduation? So usually this leave phase is brief and often triggers a new choose phase. And before we move forward into the practice of supported education, are there any questions about the model or the practice?
So some questions have been raised. Yeah, so let's, I'm going to ask a couple that I think are good for here and save a couple that I think are maybe better for later.
Mhm.
So one of the questions is about eligibility. You were talking about the eligibility criteria, and you talked about, you know, if the person says they want to
Yes.
pursue this, that's, you know, sort of as much as you need. And so the question was, is no diagnosis needed? So can you address that?
So it depends on who's funding your organization and how you're getting paid. So typically, a person does have to have a mental health condition as a diagnosis. It should not be, certain diagnoses shouldn't be ruled out though. So for example, if somebody is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, they wouldn't be discounted because of that diagnosis. But yes, if you're looking at it from, you know, a program that is a behavioral health organization, a mental health program, then yes, usually programs do require there's some diagnosis.
Okay.
Do you want to add something to that?
Speaking to the model,
Mhm.
the model of support education is specifically developed for individuals with mental health conditions.
So the expectation would be that they've met some level of criteria of having a mental health condition.
Correct.
Very good. So another sort of set of questions that I think a little bit gets to the model here. I'll pose them here if you want to hold off on them till the end.
Okay.
That's certainly fine here too. But somebody commented, you know, that they really love this concept, this approach, and that they're surprised that this is sort of their first exposure to it. So their questions are really about, you know, where is this? So are these services available to students currently? How does somebody go about accessing them? How does somebody find out where they are, and how are they funded?
Great sets of questions. And I wish there was a good resource where I can say, yes, here's a listing of all of these supported education programs around the country or even within our region. And perhaps that's something that we could work on. Unfortunately, there are not as many supported education programs out there. There's a much stronger need. So here in the state of New Jersey, we've had supported education since around 2008, 2009, in that range. So it's still a relatively new service. It started, the earliest literature on supported ed is from the 80s. Unfortunately, it's taken a lot longer to get it going. I think in the early 2000s, there was a study and there were about 100 supported education programs nationwide. I don't know what that number is up to now. There are programs in New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So some within our surrounding area that offer supported education. If you're in New Jersey, we certainly can get you that flyer and the contact information for those programs. New York, we'd have to do a little bit of digging to get some more program-specific information. The programs are funded in a variety of ways depending on where they are. Some are grant funded or through state divisions of mental health and addiction services, like here in New Jersey. And they are reimbursable for Medicaid, correct? I'm kicking that to you in some places.
In some places, correct.
Other times you might see supported education programs pop up at colleges or universities. They might have their own version of supported education. So obviously then it's not a community-based freestanding model. But they are getting some types of specific education support on campus. Typically, there isn't as much coordination with the mental health treatment team, though, when we see these programs. But and actually this kind of segues into our next part really well. There needs to be more. Ultimately, there really does need to be more when it comes to supported education because there is so much promise around it. You know, all of the literature points to the increasing numbers of college students with mental health conditions, the decreasing rates of graduation for students within this group. So there really is a lot of promise. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see what's emerging in the next couple of years. So like I said, that kind of leads us into this next part. Because this is a relatively new practice, it's still really being refined. Many of the programs follow the SAMHSA model of SED. However, Not all of them do. As I said, some are campus-based. Some provide certain elements of this model, but not others. And there are a lot of programs that have begun to integrate with supported employment. So traditionally, at least here in New Jersey, we've seen that supported education and supported employment started out very separate. And in a lot of places, this is still the case, where supported employment is a separate service providing, really very focused and targeted employment supports, but not looking at this other educational piece. We're seeing more programs starting to merge, and instead of being called supported employment or supported education, it might be career services. The New Jersey Learn programs kind of have followed this model. There's also a model in early development called the HYPE model, Helping Youth on the Path to Employment. This model is designed for young adults primarily, but is also one of these integrated models that provides both education and employment supports for people. So there's no separation. This is kind of what we're starting to see happen in more and more places where practitioners are cross-trained. So SE practitioners are cross-trained on education. Education practitioners are cross-trained to help people, be able to achieve employment goals. One of the interesting things that Amy and I saw when we were working in supported education, our program originally started off as one of these kind of more siloed programs where it was just education. We later merged, but one of the things that led to that merger was we were realizing that we had more students who were in SED, receiving supported education services, working than the supported employment program had. And what we were seeing was that students were getting these educational successes. We saw self-efficacy was developing. They were connecting with other peers on campus, and they were coming in and asking about work, whether that was work study or part-time work. But it was really this awesome thing to kind of see people expand on their goals. So that led us to be like, well, instead of transferring this person to an employment counselor, why don't we just do both and have everybody do both? So that's another kind of another thing that's starting to pop up within education. We're also seeing more education being infused into other program modalities. So we know that in ACT, there's a vocational counselor on that team, and historically the vocational counselor was responsible for employment supports. More and more ACT teams are also training their vocational counselors to provide educational supports and talking to people about the role of training and education. We're seeing this in coordinated specialty care, like in First Episode psychosis programs. The On Track New York model and the Navigate model both have employment and education counselors, where we recognize that this is, a developmentally normal part of being a young adult, is connecting to employment, connecting to educational goals. So we're seeing that start to become integrated with other types of recovery treatment. And we're also seeing housing supports. So more of a focus on community integration rather than just staying out of the hospital. Additionally, we're seeing some peer-based services. So there's an article in our resource section that talks about the role of incorporating peers onto career service teams. But then there are other support programs which are showing a lot of progress, such as Project Let's, which is an entirely peer-based support program for college students with neurodiversity. And then there's this European network on supported education, and they have some really interesting things coming out of there. And they have a number of their resources available in English. There's English language translations. So I encourage you to check that out too as a resource. It's always great to be able to keep on top of what's happening around the world and see what can be adapted. So there's a team out of the Netherlands who's partnered with a group in the Czech Republic, Norway, Portugal, and Sweden. I think they've now expanded their reach to Australia and South Africa, so they are not just the European network anymore, I suppose. But they've developed a number of resources. They actually have a supported ed toolkit too, which uses the Choose, Get, Keep model. That's available in 6 languages. They've developed a peer-to-peer group and resources around non-disclosure for disclosure for non-apparent disabilities. They're also going to be hosting a world conference this November on supported education, and that'll be the first of its kind. Amy and I are going to be there, and we're excited. We're introducing a workbook that we're developing towards supporting students to make decisions regarding accommodations and use of accommodations in the post-secondary environment. Their website is on the resource slide, so I encourage you to take a look at some of their tools that have been translated. And then finally, we've got, on this resource slide, we have the link here for the SAMHSA toolkit. It's a pretty comprehensive kit. There are a lot of different types of worksheets, tips for identifying funding, getting training, and just strategies to start supporting students that you're working with, even if you're not setting up your own supported ed model, but just how can you infuse this into whatever program modality you're working within. And then we've got the link for HYPE, so you can start to see as more emerges from that model. And then the European Network on Supported Ed, along with 2 fairly recent articles on supported ed, and just to keep on top of some things that are starting to shape our ongoing service delivery. So that's all we have as far as content, but we would love to be able to answer some more questions.
So we have some questions that have come in as you've been going, but I also encourage participants, if they have additional questions, that they can type them either in the chat box or in the Q&A feature, and I will pose those to the presenters as well. So there are a couple questions that I think are related. One is around starting supported education services and supports in secondary education.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that would be beneficial?
Yes, definitely. The earlier that you can talk to students about their long-term career goals, provide supports, helping them identify functional issues, educate them on various academic environments, I think the better. All of these skills are able to be translated, whether it's in secondary education or post-secondary education.
Excellent. And then sort of maybe a related question was, did you know if SED services have been provided related to the WIOA funding programs? And if so, do you know anything about how that's gone?
So while it certainly could fulfill the requirement for some of the WIOA funding, I know a couple programs have started integrating into high school during senior year.
Right.
Correct? And did they use WIOA funding?
I believe they were able to get a little bit of funding from the WIOA monies.
I don't personally know or how that is set up, but I do believe that some programs have taken that approach where they've implemented in high school, senior year. And was that paired with those who are working with a VR transition coordinator?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Some other questions. Well, so we had one participant, Kayla, who added in when we were discussing earlier that she works in a supported education program in Santa Cruz, California, at Cabrillo College. I'm not exactly sure if that's how it's pronounced. I'm sorry, Kayla, if that's wrong. But she works closely with the Accessibility Support Center on campus, and that program is partially grant funded and partially Medi-Cal funded. So
Okay.
I think she was contributing to the discussion around how services, if they're in place and how they're funded. So
Fantastic.
thank you,
Thank you,
Kayla. So another question was, how much behind the scenes work needs or should be done with the educational partners so that there's good communication and coordination for the students? So you're talking about sort of freestanding supported employment services. How do they then work? How do they support the student who may be going to any number of different colleges, universities, career and technical programs?
Great question. So ultimately, it's up to the student. to decide how much involvement they want with the supported education counselor and how present they want the education counselor to be. Amy and I did a lot of work where we would help to advocate with the student or be there to support them for things like linkage to counseling services or conversations with financial aid at school, especially with accessibility or disability services, linking people to tutors. Often we wouldn't really have contact with professors. I think there were very rare instances where I was in contact with someone's professor. We would often role play or use other strategies to help the student to have certain types of conversations with professors or faculty in educational environments. But those conversations around disclosure and who am I to you, how do you want me to best support you, were always happening.
I think the emphasis when we were providing support education services, and if you look at the SAMHSA toolkit, the emphasis is on skill development and helping the student to navigate, conversations with school representatives, whether it be a office or a professor, accommodations office. I can't even recall a time where we spoke to a professor on the behalf of a student. In fact, we had to be very mindful when we were working with a student, because we might have previously worked with an academic institution in trying to promote our program, to go to campus and talk about the support education program so that they could refer students to us. So if we were working with a student where they had to go into an office where we had previously, spoke on behalf of the support education program, we had to be mindful not to be, seen with that student or to disclose to that student. We've already spoken to these representatives and they're aware that we work within the support education program. So us being together would be a disclosure in and of itself. But yeah, it's that skill development, so crucial.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions from our audience that you would like to present to our presenters here? I had an additional question. You were talking about reasonable accommodations, and I know this is a significant challenge. And my understanding of some of the literature is that individuals who work in disability services or accessibility support centers often are less well versed in what would be reasonable accommodations for a student with a mental health condition as compared to, say, a visual impairment or a learning disability. And you were saying you could spend a whole day, maybe multiple days on that. But I'm wondering if you could just share with the attendees maybe one or two examples of accommodations that are maybe people would be less familiar. You mentioned people are familiar with sort of time and a half or extra time for assignments, but are there other accommodations just to give a flavor of what that might look like?
Sure. I think you do want to we can each share one.
Yeah, we can each share one. So I worked with a student who had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and they had difficulty with composition writing. For whatever reason, when they were attempting to write their papers, it would be especially challenging trying to get the topic, the sentence, the thought out in a cohesive way when they were typing. And so we, tried building skills of developing organizational structures for writing papers, thought bubbles and such. And that was still trying to type out for this individual the content. And so we looked at alternatives to typing. And one of such alternatives is talk to text or speech to text, where you are able to, with a microphone, speak what you want to have typed out, and it through that software is then typed out through the computer. One of these most better known programs is Dragon Dictation software. And so that is a reasonable accommodation because you can go to the accessibility office and they can provide that student with that software.
I had worked with a student using Dragon as well. She was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And for her, she would get, if she was sitting looking at that blank white Word document, she would get really stuck. Dragon allowed her the freedom to kind of move around her room and walk around and verbally dictate some of that information to get going on her assignments. So that's a great one that you brought that up. Another thing that I was thinking of, I was working with a student and one of his functional difficulties was speaking in front of people. His mind would go blank, his anxiety would kick up, and he was taking a history class. One of the projects during that semester was that he had to do this big in-class presentation. For him, it was going to be very hard for him in this huge lecture hall to be able to do that presentation, to convey what he wanted to convey. And we asked for an accommodation that he recorded his presentation and had it played for the class. So he was still, hitting every item that he needed to in that presentation. He still was providing that material and that content to the professor. But he didn't have to do it in a live fashion. It was played for the class. If that was a public speaking class, that wouldn't have been okay because of the essential functions of that class. Since public speaking was not an essential function, it was not an objective of that course, that was an accommodation. So it was that modified assignment. And then the other one that I want to mention really quick, because we've had a number of students who found a lot of success using LiveScribe pens. Yeah. So this is a type of assistive technology that acts as a recording device, but it's a writing instrument. So they could be writing their notes out. It also acts as a recorder. It syncs, to a web-based account. So all of their notes, the audio of their notes is uploaded along with the image of their notes. It can be converted to type from their handwriting. And the cool thing with that, for any of you who have ever used like a tape recorder to record class and you're rewinding and fast forwarding with the smart pen, you just touch it to a word. So you might be in a class and your mind starts racing, you're having trouble focusing, or you need to get up and take a break, or you're doodling in the margins because your mind is wandering. You can get home and touch the pen to that doodle or to that word where you started to lose focus, and the audio starts playing right from that point. So it's a really fantastic, kind of low stigma tool and accommodation.
Wonderful, thank you. We have another question that is about supported education for online classes and programs. Do you see any different challenges with that?
I think there are some unique challenges in working with students that choose to go online and not that brick and mortar academic institution. Students will typically, when they're taking online courses, cite a lot of time management concerns, getting that motivation to get up and do the work and carve out the time and commit to the time can be a common barrier that students attending online courses share with us. So we provide a lot of service in terms of targeting these specific executive functioning issues and skills, building better time management skills, assessing where the person is spending their time, if they're having trouble getting motivated, if they're procrastinating. There's actually a lot of literature coming out now about procrastination and time management and how it's an emotional regulation issue. So we look at, okay, let's talk about, what's going on and preventing you from getting to the work. So yeah, it I think has its unique concerns. And I should mention as well that the tech can be challenging for people to navigate an online learning platform. Depending on the school they're going to, they're all very different. How do you navigate the course shell? How do you participate in forums or upload videos? So there's a lot of skill development just with tech. And then accommodations on an online class look a little bit different, and it's almost always that time and a half on test.
If I may add a little bit,
Please.
So myself and some other colleagues here in the department did do a small survey study of students who were in online courses and compared the responses of those who had a mental health condition and those who didn't. Some of those things that you mentioned, you know, are the things that came up. The technology, the time management was huge. Of course, time management is a challenge across the board, but particularly challenging when there's not the structure of an in-person class. And that was published in the Journal of Post-Secondary Education and Disability, if anybody's interested. But I think the other thing, and I know you guys know this, but that there are also benefits for students with mental health conditions for the online program. So it's sort of figuring out what are those unique supports they need if that is a better environment for them.
And that's really, you know, something that during that choose phase, we're talking about what are the benefits and drawbacks of various environments. What is your personal criteria? What are you hoping to get out of your educational experience?
Right, because if the social connection is part of it,
Exactly.
then the
It's
online.
not meeting a value or a need.
Right.
And I just wanted to also just bring everybody's attention to one of our panelists, Denise, has provided a link. She and I guess some colleagues developed a transition guidebook for behavioral health available in English and Spanish.
Great.
Wonderful.
That provides some generic accommodations, not specific programs, but could be a resource for folks as well.
Thank you, Denise.
Any questions from our attendees? I think I got all of the questions that were posed. If I didn't, people can feel free to pose them again. But we want to thank our presenters here. We will provide an email to you with the slides that they've used in this presentation. We'll also send you an email with a link to our website that has a recording of this webinar as well as the slides electronically if you want to review it or if you want to share it with any of your colleagues. We'll also be trying to pull together some additional resources that some folks asked for while this webinar was going on and see about trying to get those pushed out to you all as well. So with no additional questions, I'll thank again our presenters, Amy Banco and Brittany Stone. We really appreciate your time in providing this very informative webinar on a service that's so critically needed and, as has been raised, not readily available. So thank you again.
Thank you for having
and
us.
thank you to all of our attendees. We're happy to have you. We're going to post one last time in the chat box links to our other upcoming webinars. And also to receive our email distribution. So if you're interested in that, just hang on the page for a second and we'll get those posted. Thanks again and have a wonderful day to everyone.